Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Back now with our final conference previews. We've got the SEC starting here with the Georgia Bulldogs. Before we do dive in, if you have been enjoying our content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate everyone's support. But diving in here, taking a look at the Georgia Bulldogs. Last year, 20-13, 8-10 in the SEC. Made the NCAA Tournament. Bit of a different looking roster this year. Obviously lost Asa Newell to the NBA draft, most notably. But starting here on the offensive side, Cody, what strengths do you see in their offensive attack?
Yeah, obviously this roster looks a little bit different, and it's a team I liked quite a bit last season. I really liked them from a defensive standpoint and thought they had some offensive upside, of course, with Asa Newell kind of connecting everything. And they look a little bit different now, but some things that should look similar is their offensive rebound attack. I think they're going to be solid on the offensive glass again. I don't think it's going to be 17th nationally good, but I think the combo of Santos Surreal, Justin Abson, Dylan James, and then the 4-star freshman and Kareem Stagg, I think is a pretty good unit. It's something that Mike White typically values. This is a group that has length, but they're also physically imposing as well. For the most part, I wouldn't say like Dylan James is all that imposing physically, but he's a good fit here. So I do think they're going to be a pretty good offensive rebounding unit. Like, you can't really run much offense through these guys, but they're going to provide second chances and be pretty strong play finishers at the very least. And that's like the area that they're going to miss. Asa Newell is like a guy like that you could run offense through pretty consistently when the guards weren't able to help out. But I think they also did a decent job replacing some of the shooting with guys like, the guys they're replacing in Demery, Dakota LaFew, Montgomery, and Tyron Lawrence. They replaced it with a guy like Alec Millender, or sorry, is that his name? Marcus Millender, sorry,
Marcus Millender,
yeah. UConn guy. Like Marcus Millender, who shot 44% last year. Justin Bailey, who I'm not sure how much he's going to play, but he shot at 45% last year on like kind of low volume. And then they retained Blue Kane, who I think is a better shooting talent than that 34% number. I think he's probably overall the best shooting talent on this roster, can do a lot of different things. And then you bring in Cannon Catchings as like a 3-4 hybrid guy. That'll be a nice floor spacer when he's playing the 4. So I think there's a little bit of extra spacing on this offense than there was a year ago. And I think they'll handle the ball a little bit better as well. They were 291st last season in turnover rate. I think the trio of Millender, Jordan Ross coming from St. Mary's, and then Jeremiah Wilkinson, I think is a better trio than the group that they had last season. So, and I think this is a more perimeter-centric offense in general. So, in turn, I think they shoot it a tad better, and I think they take care of the ball a tad better also.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Looking at the guard group, just based on their previous stops, or the ones that are returning, like a guy like Blue Kane, their turnover rates are low. I do think they will be able to take care of the ball better. You mentioned offensive rebounding. One of the main notes I jotted down was like, I don't think, obviously, it's hard to repeat being, what did you say, 17th in the country. That was something that really stood out to me because, you lost a guy in like RJ Godfrey. You lost Asa Newell, who averaged 3.3 offensive rebounds a game. So they didn't like replace that with high level. Like, they kind of just have the guys coming back, like you mentioned, like Cyril Abson. They got the freshman coming in Stagg. But overall, like, they're going to take a step back on the offensive glass compared to, what they averaged last year. It was almost 12 offensive rebounds a game. Like, I think it might be closer to like upper 9s or 10, which is still, I think it'll still be good. But I just think it's going to be a bit of a step back there. For me, on the weaknesses side of things, I think like primarily, there's no go-to scorer here. I mean, like, I think people want Cannon Catchings to be that guy. I think he has some traits of being that guy, but I don't necessarily believe in his like off the bounce creation like you saw last year at BYU. It's a lot of just catch and shoot, movement shooting, but him putting it on the deck and actually becoming like a 3-level scorer, I'm not sure. I'm a little bit of a believer, but I need to see it first, which kind of has me at this point a little bit questioning as to like who their go-to guy is in a league that's as good as any in the country, right? It's the SEC. You're going to play a great team every night, and it's going to be extremely difficult without like a true go-to guy to win games in this league, particularly on the road. Another thing for me, the interior offense is a bit of a question mark, right? You mentioned Cyril averaged 4.6 points a game last year, only played 14 minutes a game. You've got Abson, who barely played last year. I just like they're not guys who obviously last year you had Asa Newell, who you could kind of play through as that 4-man. They don't really have that now. So I'm a little bit skeptical on the interior creation from their front court. And then, the final thing I wanted to mention is just kind of the guard efficiency overall. You've got a guy like Jordan Ross, 42% effective field goal percentage guy. Marcus Millender, he's on the higher end of things at like 52%. Jeremiah Wilkinson is, down at 47% effective field goal percentage. And none of them really do a great job of like creating offense for others. There's a lot of kind of like, tunnel vision on creating shots for themselves. And, they're not an overly efficient bunch. Like you mentioned, I think they're going to take care of the ball fine, but I don't really know how much they're going to, really create good offense for this Georgia team. And I think that with that lower effective field goal percentage, particularly, I just think they might live in the mid range a bit too much. Take some kind of worse shots at times. So that's kind of where my concerns lie with this offense. Like it'll be fine. They'll take care of the ball. They'll get on the offensive glass. But, there's just not really anything that's going to wow you with this offensive group.
Yeah, those are good points. I'm pretty worried about the interior offense as well. That was my main concern. And to your point about the offensive rebounding, it is key. Like at the 4 position, they're not really going to have that second offensive rebounder on the floor at all times like they had last year with Asa Newell. He could slide up to the 5, and they had RJ Godfrey in there as well. So they don't really have that element. Like there's going to be some Dylan James at the 4, Cannon Catchings at the 3, which is fine, but it's not like James is like a menace on the glass like Newell was. So like, but I am pretty worried about the rim offense as well. Especially compared to past Mike White teams. Like Mike White teams like to live at the rim. They like to attack the rim, attack in transition a little bit, and try to get to the free throw line too. And I just think they're a little bit lacking in this area. They were last year 85th percentile in rim field goal attempt percentage, and they were 81st percentile in efficiency. And it's got to be worse. Like I would almost be willing to bet that 100%. And obviously, there's more spacing within this offense, like I mentioned. Like if you put Catchings to the 4, and then you have a few more shooters in the backcourt with like Millender and Bailey and Blue Kane as well. But I just think these guys struggle to score at the rim in general. There's a lot of smaller guards, which I don't think like Mike White teams are like typically have. They're usually like bigger, more two-way guards. But they have Wilkinson, who's probably the best rim scorer of like the 1 and 2 guards in this group. Like 63rd percentile rim rate, or on pretty high volume. So, or rim efficiency. So, I mean, he's the guy I'm least worried about, but he's 6'1", and like the effective field goal percentage was low, like you mentioned. And then a guy like Jordan Ross, like I'm just not high on him translating. I think there are a lot of issues in his game in the paint, and he doesn't really shoot it. I think he's probably the best candidate to actually play point guard. Like if you want a pure point guard on the floor, like Ross is probably the guy you go to, but I just think he's very limited as a scorer. And the rest of the group is more perimeter oriented, and the fact that Newell is out and you have more low usage play finishers, I just think it's it creates a pretty poor outlook for the rim offense. And when Mike White offenses typically aren't great on the perimeter anyway, it's not really a creative offense. I think it kind of creates some potential for disaster on this end.
Yeah, I would agree. Shifting now to the defensive side of the ball, I mean, I think there's some potential for some playmakers here on this side. Again, obviously losing like Asa Newell as kind of a versatile four-man on this end, losing Silas Demery to UConn, of course, hurts that backcourt group quite a bit. Averaged almost 2 steals a game. But on this end, what strengths do you see?
Yeah, it's the rim protection for me. It's the front court defense. It's kind of always the backbone of a Mike White defense. And you have a guy in Santos Surreal who's going to play much more this season, and he has real size, length, and athleticism up front. He had a 12.5% block rate last season. Then you have Justin Abson as the backup 5, who had a 9% block rate. Dylan James, who's going to play the 4 quite a bit, had a 4.4% block rate. I think this is kind of where his calling card is at. He doesn't provide a ton of value on offense, but he can guard on the perimeter and bring you some solid weak side rim protection. So I do like him on this end quite a bit. And then you have a guy in Kareem Stagg who's a really good two-way rebounder. Not completely sure what he brings to the table as a rim protector, but I think his rebounding is going to be a plus quality. And then, if you slide a guy like Cannon Catchings down to the 3, like I think it creates like a lot of length, a lot of maybe not physicality. Catchings is a little bit thinner, but he's a guy that can provide you some rim protection as well. He's more of a playmaker on the defensive end than anything. So you can have a more like typical Mike White looking team, particularly on the defensive end with the front court. So, and it's typically this aspect for them, the front court defense, and just playing super physical always gives like a Mike White defense a high floor. So I'm not like overly concerned about this defense, but there are some concerns that I have, particularly in the backcourt. I figured that you might dive into that a little bit too.
Yeah. Before I do dive in there, I wanted to just mention one thing about the front court, and I think it's good that they have a lot of length. It's like I look at a guy like Cyril, who we mentioned, like only played 14 minutes a game last year. Of course, provides a lot of length and rim protection. However, like the downside to him is, he averaged over 2 fouls in his 14 minutes, and his fouls per 40 were over 6. So that is one area of concern for me. I think like some discipline out of their front court could be a bit of a problem. Thankfully, like Abson hasn't really had that issue in any of his 3 years. 2 years at App State, he did a great job of protecting the rim without fouling. Averaged 2.8 blocks this last year at App State, and only 1.3 fouls a game in 24 minutes. So that is certainly a plus quality for him. But from Cyril's perspective, I'm a little bit worried just about his discipline overall. Moving to the backcourt, I just don't love this group in general. From just like you mentioned on the offensive side, it's a lot of smaller guards that just don't have a ton of. They just don't really have any versatility to guard multiple positions, to be overly physical, to really do like. I think there's some potential for like some playmaking, I guess, like Millender's 3% steal rate. Like I don't really like a guy like Jordan Ross, like you said. Blue Kane, about a 3% steal rate. So I think there's some playmaking here, but I just don't really love the on-ball defense of this backcourt group in general. Like I think they're too small. They don't tend to really keep the ball in front at a super high level. They're not very switchable. So for me, like this backcourt group is certainly the weak point of this defense. Thankfully, they have a front court that should be able to help them out in that area. And like you mentioned, like maybe they move Catchings up to the 3 and provide a little bit more versatility and length, and not have as many of those smaller guards on the floor at once. But like, you're looking at Wilkinson at 6'1", Millender at 5'11", Jordan Ross at 6'3", and to me, like, is Jordan Ross, whenever I watch him, I feel like he's not 6'3". Like that feels pretty generous. So, I just don't think that, if you're gonna, you mentioned Georgia's style with Mike White being physical, like it's hard to be physical and really impactful with that backcourt on the defensive end.
Yeah, as much as the front court fits, the back court doesn't fit really at all. These are some small guards, and George, like Mike White backcourts are built off of like physical, being a two-way presence, being able to guard multiple positions. And I think White was just kind of looking for some more perimeter offense. And I don't love some of the outlooks for them on the offensive end, and it's going to probably hurt them on the defensive end. I think the main backcourt could honestly turn into like Millender, Wilkinson, Kane, and that's a pretty poor defensive group on the perimeter. I think Kane's the best defender of those three, and I think he's pretty underrated. I don't think people really appreciate what he does defensively. He's solid. So, but as a whole, I'm not all that excited about it. Like Wilkinson had the worst defensive box plus minus at Cal last season, and that wasn't a very good defense. So I'm fairly worried about that. His steal rate's low. Like he's just like not like a short wingspan as well. So it's just there's not a ton of physical qualities from him. And like I mentioned, I don't know if Ross is a guy that's going to play a ton of minutes just because the offensive end is so limiting. I don't think he does enough defensively to really mask those things on the offensive side. And I think a guy like Justin Bailey can play a pretty big role on the defensive end. I think he's more of a bench piece because of the offensive side. There's really no creation. Like he shot at 46%, but it's a pretty slow release, needs like a little bit of time. And I'm not sure he's a power 5 offensive player in any other way besides his shooting, but he's probably the best perimeter defender on the roster. It's just a matter of how much he plays. And, I don't think Catchings is going to play the 3 all the time. Like I think it would help the defense a little bit. It would like the ball handling would be in a pretty rough spot on the offensive end. But if he's playing the 4, I think this takes away from this team's best quality, which is like their physicality in the front court and rim protection up front. Like Catchings is, a fine, like I guess an okay rim protector on an average team, but for this team that kind of lives off of it, I think it's rather poor. So I do have my concerns with that perimeter defense, and defensive rebounding is always a weakness with this Georgia defense as well. They play super aggressive. They're always kind of looking for block shots, and Mike White defenses have been outside the top 250 in all 3 years at Georgia, and he hasn't been inside the top 100 in defensive rebound rate as a coach since 2008. So pretty rough, honestly. I think, 2012, not 2008. But yeah, his teams are always just kind of looking to hunt plays, hunt steals, hunt blocks. It takes you out of rebound position. And, when you don't have the great athletes on the perimeter to contest shots at a high level, it creates a worse Mike White defense than we've seen.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's a pretty striking stat that, his teams haven't been, inside, what'd you say, the top 100?
Yeah, top 100. They actually haven't been inside the top 100 one time since 2012, and in his entire coaching career. His best finish was 108th in defensive rebound rate.
Yeah, so not certainly a weakness of his teams, but shifting gears now, MVP X factor for Georgia. Who'd you go with?
I had a pretty tough time deciding who I was going to pick for MVP. Like ideally, like I want to pick Catchings. I'm just not high on his creation off the bounce. I think he really struggles to get to the rim. He's going to be very reliant on his dribble pull up if he wants to be an initiator. So ultimately, I went with Jeremiah Wilkinson. I know the efficiency is pretty rough, or was rough at Cal. He shot at 39.9% from the field, but I think he is the best pure on-ball creator on this roster, and I think he's going to have to carry a lot of the load scoring-wise. So ultimately, I went with Wilkinson. I considered Blue Kane as well, just because he might have to take on a little more responsibility on the ball, and he's their best shooter on the roster. But ultimately, I went with Wilkinson, and my X factor, I did go with Cannon Catchings. I think he's going to have to step up really on both ends of the floor. If he can be that floor spacing 4 and shoot it close to 38, 39% on decent volume and defend at a better level than I expect. I think Georgia can be a little bit better this year.
Yeah. I went with the same player for MVP and X Factor. I went with Cannon Catchings. I'm buying it a little bit. I think he's gonna have some runway here, to have some freedom on the offensive end, and he's obviously talented. We saw him, in spurts last year. Obviously, the off the dribble creation isn't fantastic, but I like him as a shot maker. I think he's going to have the ability to take plenty of shots. So I went with him as their MVP and X factor, because I think he is going to be a really important piece to whether or not like Georgia finishes at their ceiling or at their floor, based on what he can provide on both ends, but primarily on the offensive end. Which leads me into ceiling and floor. Ceiling and floor, Cody, for Georgia. Where'd you go here?
Yeah, I think the ceiling's pretty capped. I mean, I'm a little bit lower than like projection sites have them on both ends of the floor, really. So I had their ceiling as 10th in the SEC. If you finish 10th, I think that can get you in bubble talks this season. It can potentially, if the league is a little bit better throughout than I have it, I think it could make you a 9 or 10 seed. But ultimately, I'm not all that high on this team when it comes to them making the tournament. My floor, I had them 15th in the league. I think South Carolina is probably pretty safely at the bottom, or like an LSU in that area. But I do see some potential for this to go very poorly. It honestly, it reminds me a little bit of like maybe not 2023 Georgia, but it's like a mix between 2024 Georgia and 2023 Georgia, where they like finished somewhere between 73rd and the 2023 team finished 159th in Torvik. I don't know if it goes that poorly, but if they're finished around the 70 range, like that's not going to get them in the tournament. It's not going to make them all that competitive in this league.
Yeah. I actually went with the same ceiling and floor. I had 10th through 15. I think I wanted to say maybe 9th, but just looking at the field here, I don't really know if they can really finish above 10. And then 15th, like you said, I think everyone's pretty low in South Carolina. I don't really see them being worse than them. I almost said 14th, but I could see a world where like LSU is above them. So we'll see. This could go south. But bold prediction wise, I went with a Cannon catching stat. I said he's going to average 15 points a game. So basically double his output from last year, 7.2 a game last year. Gets up to 15 this year.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's definitely in the realm of possibility. I had my bold prediction was I think Georgia just performs drastically lower than or drastically worse than the expectation from. I just went off the Torvik ranking. They have them 33rd. I think they finish at least 30 spots below that. I think they can get to like 63rd or worse.
Yeah, I would agree. I think 33rd is definitely too high, but we'll find out here. Less than 3 weeks now. So anyway, that wraps things up for the Georgia Bulldogs. Thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.